Okay, so we're going to look at the Peavey XR1212 powered mixer. First place we need to start is the mic inputs. The preamp behind this socket here is really high quality. That means it's got low noise and lots of headroom, so it's going to give us a really clean signal passing through the mixer and eventually out to our loudspeakers. Then we've got a line input and also our insert. So if we want to put a graphic equalizer or a compressor just on one individual channel, then that's the socket we're going to use to do that. The first control we have is probably one of the most important in the system, and that's our input gain. This matches the output from our microphone to the input of the mixer so that everything balances in nicely as it progresses through the system. If we get it wrong here and we introduce any kind of distortion, that distortion simply gets made louder and louder and louder as it goes through the system, and that's really dangerous for our loudspeakers. It's important that we get this right, and to help us do it, at the bottom of the channel we have something called a Pfl, and we'll come on to that in a second. Immediately below the gain control we have an 80 Hertz high pass filter. This is really handy if you've got microphones on stands on top of a hollow stage or something. Just make sure that you get rid of any of that kind of rumbling that can come through the microphone stand and cloud up the bottom end of the system. After that we've got our EQ. This is where it starts to get really different from anything else that I've seen. We've got a treble and a bass just like most systems, but we've also got two different ways of controlling the mid frequencies. The first one is something called high mid morph. Now this is actually two tone controls in one, and when we turn that control down it reduces 2.5 kilohertz, which is one of the most sensitive parts of the human ear. So if you're finding that a particular sound is rather aggressive on your ear, simply turning this control down will smooth that out. However, when you boost, it boosts at 4 kilohertz, which adds a really nice presence rise to things like vocal microphones. So that's two things in one. Then we come on to our low-mid control. Now this is really important, and I haven't found this control on any other product other than a Peavey mixer. Most professional sound engineers understand that when you place a microphone close to its source, we get an abundance of low-mid, and that can make things like vocals and drums sound really hard and lacking in low-end. By taking those frequencies out, you find that you clean up that signal really quickly, and because we're actually asking the system to do less because we've taken something away, we can then afford to just compensate with a little bit more volume at the bottom. That's far better than going the opposite way and thinking, well, there's not enough bass, so what I'm going to do is grab the bass and turn it up. We've never got rid of the original problem, which was masking these low frequencies. Instead, we've asked the PA system to do more and more at the low end, and that's really tough on any PA. Next, we have our two monitor sends, which when you've got 12 inputs is really handy to be able to send two different mixes out to your monitors. Then we've got our effects send, which will come onto the internal processor in a second. Pan controls, a mute with a LED, which also acts as a clip light if we overdrive the input stage. Signal light, just so as we can check that lines are all okay. 60mm smooth fader, and then at the bottom we've got the Pfl control. If you remember rightly, I said this Pfl control was important because it works in tandem with our input gain. How we use that is we push the button to engage it, the yellow LED comes on, and now what happens is our signal is routed directly from our input through this one channel and out to our master VU meters. Now all we do is we turn our input gain up until, with the most dynamic signal coming through that input channel, and by that I mean if you've got a singer, make sure they're singing a loud song. If it's a drummer, make sure they're hitting the kick drum nice and hard, and make sure that we don't get any peaks above 0 dB. That's the last green LED on this ladder. Once you're happy that you've done that, release the button, move on to the next channel. You should do this at the start of every gig just to ensure that all your input gains are optimized for the system that you're using that night. So now we've looked at channel 1, you'll find that's repeated all the way through to channel 10. So they're all identical. Then we come on to our stereo inputs. What you'll find here is that we actually have an XLR for each one of our stereo ins, as well as our jacks, phonos, and at the push of a button, a 3.5mm jack. So if you want to plug an iPod or some other MP3 player directly in, then you can do that on a 3.5mm jack and switch between that and the phono input on channel 12. So lots of inputs as far as stereo channels go. But importantly, when we come down to the gain controls for our stereo channels, you'll find that there's a separate one for our mic and a separate one for our line. That means that there's two preamps on board here, and we can actually use both of these inputs at the same time. Now it does share EQ, but that means if you needed an extra couple of input channels just for a special occasion, then you know that you can use your mic inputs here as well. The 3-band EQ shares the same low mid that you find on all of the other mono channels. So again, perfect for being able to EQ the vocals correctly, because we know that we can pull 500 Hertz out, get a nice smooth vocal sound that's nice and rich and deep at the same time. Then the rest of the channel remains the same as the others, so we've got two monitor sends, an effects send, all the way through to our Pfl button at the bottom.